Hey everyone, and welcome to the Natalie Potts podcast. Before we start, if you would like to find out more about how you can build and grow your business, head to the episode notes where you can find a direct link that connects you straight to my WhatsApp. Send me a message and ask me anything related to strategy, sales, mindset, and growing your business. I would love to hear from you. And if you know anyone who needs to hear this episode, be sure to pass it forward. So let's dive in. Welcome, Claire, and thank you for joining me today. As I always say at the start of every conversation, I know this is going to be a great conversation because we've known each other for a while now, probably over a year actually, which we'll come on to in a minute because I do think this is an important point as well. But I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, what you do. But with that part, let's kick off with how we got to know each other, because I'm always getting clients say, can't get leads, and we need to remember leads are human beings in a business, and they can't find people to connect with, or they might have worlds where they're starting out their business, it's very negative and they're not around like-minded people. So let's share how we got to know one another.
Yeah, sure. So we met in a mastermind community, which is for business people looking to grow their businesses. And it really does bring in people from lots of different industries, which is great. It's great to meet people who are doing different things. And that's where we connected, wasn't it?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. I was looking for a community that was going to support me through the transition of when I left corporate into my own business, and like you say, just to meet different people. And I even know in a space of when I try and go to the gym, that I meet people that I'd never met in any walk of life if I wasn't in that space, and it is so powerful. And this is exact example of what can grow from that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's something to be said for connection, isn't there? And being
Yeah.
able to be alongside others as we're building our businesses, because it can be really isolating. And so it's really nice to just, even if we're not at the same stages or not doing the same thing or just in different industries, to be around other people who are also focusing on building their businesses and on personal growth and all of that kind of stuff. It's great to be alongside other people and have that connection.
100%. Share with us all about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's an absolute pleasure to come in. My name is Dr. Clair Burley. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I specialize in attachment trauma and healing those sort of inner child wounds. Psychology is a big kind of, industry, and there's lots of different areas within psychology. The reason why I ended up specializing in attachment trauma specifically is because to me it feels like this is the root. There's a lot of talk about mindset and lots of different sort of coaching techniques that we can use to kind of get our mindset in the right place, and there's lots of sort of noise around that. Where I'm a bit different is I'll go underneath all of those things and I'll look at where those patterns have come from.
Yeah.
And I sort of found myself in that space because I really sort of reject the idea that we're just these sort of individuals with, some of the language would be like dysfunctional or, mental ill health. And I sort of reject the notion that we're just sort of individuals with these things inside of us. Because to me, we're the patterns that we have and the things that we experience, whether it's things that people might describe as blocks and barriers, or whether it's more emotional, these are patterns that are rooted somewhere, and they didn't come from just inside of our own brain or our own bodies. That these patterns are a very understandable result of an environment that we have been in. And for me, that's relationally based. It's not just sort of, this external thing, but the important relationships that we grow up in have such an impact on us. And that's what creates these patterns. So it goes beyond mindset and it goes a bit deeper. So that's where I'm a bit different.
It's really interesting what you share there, and I make lots of notes anyway, but just to draw my ideas and make sure I ask the right questions I'm thinking, because there's a couple of things there I'm thinking about from my own perspective. One, business. Two, the patterns I've had. And I have this big thing that we get to I'm 36, but we get to our 30s and 40s and we're like, we all need some help. And it's like, what could we do to help younger generations? I know you've got children, and look at my niece, and I think, when I talk about things like money, what are the patterns and the beliefs that I'm planting in her that will impact the rest of her life? And I guess my parents may have thought in that way, but I think we see things slightly different in the world now. And I know through the work that we can do, especially for us, it's with our own businesses, etc., and helping people on. I do more mindset work. That those are the questions we ask and explore more, for sure. and seek to understand. I think whether we always understand everything is a different matter. So I kind of think from that as a business, and I think from myself and that as well, but also like you said there, like the relationships I have with myself is really important, and then the relationships I have with others. And I'm always telling people to, you got to start with you, that awareness part, because if you don't work on you, and as selfish as that can seem, and the whole analogy of put your own oxygen mask on before, that how can you serve somebody else to the best of your ability and potential if you're really not giving your time to understand how you work, why you do what you do, how do you change those patterns, etc., and your behavior? Because we can, but that starts with awareness that one, you need to, and then two, that you want to.
Well, it all comes from self, doesn't it? So having self-awareness and really understanding ourselves on a deeper level is going to have such a ripple effect to everything else. Lots of people will think about their businesses, or in my world, people will come and talk about relationships, but we kind of need to take the first step, which is let's focus on ourselves and our internal selves first, and then the ripple effect is it has an impact on our relationships and our businesses, because that's where things start. It's our internal relationship with ourself that holds the keys for all those other things, because we have really complicated internal worlds. We're not just a couple of thoughts here or a couple of emotions there. Our internal world is actually quite complex, and so it can really benefit. It gives us an edge, it gives us strength to have awareness of what our internal worlds are like, what's going on inside. If we really paid attention, what are the things that we would notice? Slowing things down and actually taking a look, being curious, exploring with a non-judgmental. Lots of people get a bit kind of critical when they do this to begin with, of beating themselves up for thinking something, or having a particular pattern be a particular way. So non-judgmental, being able to really understand what's going on inside, is such a strength.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've always battled with has been when I was younger, I was always more overweight than I wanted to be. And that in early relationships impacted, but then it never really impacted in work. I had a certain level of confidence and self-esteem there, but it definitely did external to that. And then it was when I went through a quite big breakup where I had to move home, and I was like, right, I'm going on my own journey. I need to be myself. I need to find out who I really am. I need to travel a bit. I want to progress in work. My three things was kind of do fitness. I wanted to change how I looked and felt about myself. I wanted to progress in work, and I wanted to get a mortgage by 30. So those were the three things, and I did them. But it was then almost like that was the opening the door as such. And it would have been before that, but to the change since then. And I've had therapy, I've had grief recovery therapy as well, lots of different types, different things. I've done counseling, I've done CBT, I've done RTT, lots of different things to explore. And I think sometimes as well that we're always looking for that magic silver bullet as such. And we'll all do it, even if we preach don't do it, doesn't exist. And it's being able to, I think, use the cliche stuff of being kind to yourself, to then explore that you're on that journey of connecting the dots as such. That's really helped me the last year to think about where are certain patterns and why I use that. And like you say, really, really slow it down. Say, that's what I'm doing right now, or that's what I'm thinking. Where's that coming from? What's it doing? What's the impact? And then what do I need to do to change it? And maybe who do I need to help me?
Yeah, absolutely. It starts with the self-awareness piece, because if we're not aware of what's happening, we can't do anything about it. So connecting the dots and getting some clarity, those light bulb moments
Mm.
of being able to understand, what is this pattern about? What is it trying to do for me? What's it protecting me from? And getting at the root of that pattern. Where did it come from? What was happening at that time that led to the development of this pattern? All of those things can help give us clarity and understanding, and then we can decide, what do we do about this then? And there's lots, as you've just listed, there's lots of different ways of
Mm.
responding to those things, which is sort of step two. What do I then do about it? Because knowing it isn't the same as being able to shift it or respond to it. And I think people get really lost at that second point of, what do I do? There's so many options, there's so many different people that can help. And I think people, general public who aren't maybe in this world, or haven't maybe done too much personal development or therapy or coaching, find it hard to know where to look.
Yeah.
I think, it's helpful to do some due diligence to find out that the people you're going to, are trained and know what they're doing. First of all, like, we want to be going to people that we can trust, because it can get vulnerable and we need to know that we're in a safe pair of hands. But then oftentimes what I find is people kind of circle around things. So you might try one technique or one model or one type of therapy and do a little bit of work on that layer, and then see how that integrates, and then maybe try another thing. And actually we add, each time we do that, we're going on another layer. So there isn't really sort of black and white rules about which way to do it, and anyone you speak to will have their own opinions on that, because we can need different things at different times, but most importantly, we need people who are trained and qualified and experienced to know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's really important. You mentioned step one and step two, and I have a good thing of sometimes taking a conversation off in a different way. What's further to the step one and step two?
Yeah, so for me, step three would be building that self-compassion. So you've got the
Yeah.
awareness piece first, and then you want to sort of be looking at what do you do about it. The next point for me is, if we have self-compassion, we're approaching the whole exercise from a different place. When we're trying to fix things, when we're trying to rush our way out the other side, which lots of us do because we're just hardwired to avoid pain. We don't want to be feeling this way. We want to get out the other side of this challenge. We're trying to rush through. Then that's not coming from the part of us that's going to be needed, the part that we need to bring. So when we connect with self-compassion, when we connect with our internal resources, or we develop additional internal resources, we're coming from a different place, and more, like we said, slow it down, and being non-judgmental, not coming in with that inner critic beating ourselves up or telling us we should or shouldn't be doing this or that, but being able to come from a more peaceful, compassionate place within inside of ourselves. That's the footing we need to do the healing. So that for me is a key piece next.
Mm. And with all of this, is there a specific person that you work with?
Do you mean
Or
in terms of my clients?
yeah, so I guess like, because again, like you said, that part of, and I very much saw that when I started out, like, where do you go? And you have to do the due diligence. It's not easily always something you can get a referral of. People will speak highly of people for sure in terms of testimonials, but it's just got me thinking about, like, with an eye, specifically, who do you work with and who do you like to work with, for what reasons?
Yeah, I tend to work with people that, given what I do and given that my focus tends to be more on the past, and let's go back and find out the root cause. Let's pay attention to the internal world a bit more maybe than the external world to begin with. I tend to attract people that are wanting to roll their sleeves up and do that. Maybe they've tried other things and it's helped but not lasted, or it's just maybe not gone deep enough, or they've gotten some self-awareness but they're still feeling the way that they're feeling. So I tend to attract people that are ready to just take it to that next layer, and want someone to guide them through that process. It as a psychologist, what I offer is very different to counseling. So
Yeah.
counseling is a reflective space where you'll talk to somebody who's warm and empathic, but will allow you to just explore the situation. Whereas as psychologists, we're trained to be more like a guide. We have these different therapy models which give us a map. We're not just doing this unending exploration, going in whichever direction it goes. We have a map to get us from A to B and the steps that we need to do to get there. So oftentimes people come to me because that's reassuring, that I know the way and I know how to lead them along that path.
Yeah.
Lots of times people come to me and they said they've had counseling and they just found it, I'm sure lots of people do find counseling helpful, but there's lots of people that don't. And
Yeah.
then they're looking for that little bit more of direction.
Yeah. And people like certainty. What
Absolutely.
comes
Yeah.
well. You
Yeah.
mentioned around, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off there.
That's okay. We just need to know we're in a safe pair of hands, don't we? That
Yeah.
people know where they're guiding us.
You mentioned at the start around attachment. I'm really interested. What does that mean if you were to define it for you? And what does that look like with people, specifically for business as well, when working with people in business? How can attachment help us to unpack certain things?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously that's a massive topic, but I'll sort of give you sort of an overview as to what it means. because there's sort of different angles you can look at with attachment. So essentially, we are born with attachment behaviors that we need to stay close to our caregivers. We're born really vulnerable. As mammals, we're not able to function for ourselves very quickly. Like if you look at other animals like giraffes or something, in a couple of hours they can go and get their own food and whatnot. We're highly dependent on our caregivers for our survival. So we have these attachment behaviors that are intended to keep our caregiver close. And so that's sort of the root really of the development of these patterns. What our attachment behaviors are going to show up as will be dependent upon the type of relationship we have. So if we have a parent caregiver who is consistent and reliable and attentive, responding in a helpful way, and is emotionally regulated, we'll develop a secure attachment where we're able to go to our caregiver for comfort when needed, but we're also able to go out and explore the world because we need that for our development. Whereas if we have a parent or caregiver who shows up in a different way, as maybe unavailable or inconsistent, then we'll develop other types of attachment behaviors. So if our caregiver is completely unavailable for whatever reason, whether it's physically or emotionally unavailable, we'll learn to switch off that being pulled back to the caregiver. We'll switch that off because they're not available as a resource, and we'll just spend all of our time out in the world. So this is where you see people that are super independent, won't ask people for help, won't go to anyone for advice, won't tell anyone if they're struggling because they're sort of, I'm going to deal with this on my own. I don't need anybody else. I need to just rely upon myself because I can't trust that other people will be there for me. The flip side is if we have a caregiver who is inconsistent, so some of the time meeting our needs and some of the time not, then we might develop a more insecure attachment style, where this is where you have people that are sort of more tuned into the caregiver than the external world. So the kids that will sort of hang off their parents' leg and won't go off and play because they're trying to stick with their caregiver to get their needs met when caregiver is available. And these people are more focused on relationships, are maybe emotionally feel things in a more overwhelming way, whereas the independent people will kind of cut off emotions and not feel as much. The insecure people will feel emotions very strongly and maybe struggle to kind of regulate those emotions. So that's like a complete whistle-stop tour of kind of what attachment is, but essentially it leads to these ways of being, the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see other people, our sort of model for the world. And then what do we do in order to navigate that world and get our needs met will be rooted in these attachment relationships.
There is, like you say, I can imagine that's a huge topic of conversation for people as well. Where do people get started with that when they're, because I think it's one of those things as well, like we said, put yourself first, but we don't naturally do that part. We don't naturally put our oxygen mask on before. We're always thinking about all those hats we've got to wear, spinning all the plates and working, your mum, everything else you got to do. So where do people start in prioritizing that, in it being more of a, I guess, because I've been on that journey, I know how important it is. Where does it become this is a need to do, not a want to do?
Yeah, so I think it's where these things start to come into our more conscious awareness, because those things aren't in our conscious awareness. They're in our unconscious. We're not thinking, we're not recognizing these patterns, and we don't see the link. What we see in our conscious awareness is I'm procrastinating, or I'm avoiding, or I'm struggling with being visible, or I'm launching something and I'm feeling doubtful about that, or I can't go to a networking event because it feels really uncomfortable. This is the layer we're consciously aware of. It's knowing that those things aren't like a personal flaw. We tend to think, oh, this is just something that's wrong with me, or this is just something I'm feeling because of the way that I am. When we know that those patterns actually make sense given our earlier experiences, that's when people get curious to say, okay, let's go and explore that then, because there's actually a solution. This isn't just something that's like a character trait that you're sort of set with, and this is just you and you'll be like this forever. We can work on these things, we can explore them, and we can shift and change them. When people know that, then they start to look, okay, what's under that layer? Well, if that avoidance is protecting you from failure or from the feeling of not being good enough, then it makes sense. It makes sense that you want to avoid it, because internally your system believes there's a worse outcome than avoiding that thing. Avoiding that thing isn't as bad as feeling this other pain that could possibly happen based on past experience. When we go to that layer, okay, what's the pain that we're trying to avoid? Where did that come from? What were the experiences that we had that led us to not only feel that way, but to develop that belief about ourselves? Then when we go to that layer, we can start working on healing that experience. And that's what shifts. It has a ripple effect. It shifts the patterns along that sort of journey.
It's so interesting because I'm speaking for the first time in business, like in my as my business brand as such, and tomorrow actually, and I'm talking about risk and I'm talking about freedom, and I've done a bit of work into it to create the talk, but I've also got to the point, the more I've been practicing or looking at the talk, I'm like, I feel like I'm even more out of I've got no idea about this and how big it is to talk about those two areas, because the thought in itself has come from the transition from corporate into my own business, which is something that I never, until quite a while into like the mastermind, I looked around and thought, I did quite a big thing. For most people won't do it because it's very safe. They avoid, like you say. And that's part of what I'm talking about, is that I was avoiding risk for so many years. I stayed there probably 2 years too long. And people say, I don't regret stuff. Like I did. That's the essence as well. It's what I feel. So, but I learned loads from that. And it also got to my point, and I do for myself believe in a certain amount of pain that we have to be in to then really bring change. And I think this is important to share, that there isn't a right size or there isn't anything perfect for everybody, and it's okay to let things go, but it's got to make sense to you, as we were exploring earlier, that part of understanding it as well, the awareness part. But it's really interesting that what I've started to then look at the last few weeks, and I always say about, like I said earlier, connecting the dots and the paying attention to what's coming into my world. And I'm talking lots around resistance and fear with clients. Of there's different definitions in both, and it's about understanding again what that means to each person. And it'd be interesting to understand your take on those two, which again are big topics of conversation. But what I notice is that for me, I very much behaviorally react differently when I'm in a state of fear versus resistance. And I find fear quite big. And I remember being asked it by a coach once, and I was like, I just don't sit well with that. I could almost answer nothing to that each week because I just feel it's really big. When you say resistance, I'm like, oh, well, I'm resisting the smaller steps and this is what I need to do. But that's exactly the part when you're sharing at the start. And I think it's important to bring clarity for people that when we're talking about the difference between exactly the practices we do, where I do coaching, strategy, mentoring, and whether we're talking therapy or psychology, psychology and behavior, and then we've got counseling, as we share lots of different things, you've got to work out that the mindset part is different. I do mindset, so I might talk about resistance and fear with clients like I did the other day. I don't go into the next steps of exactly like you say, but what we're going to do about it. And that's the real difference of what we're talking about when we say personal development or going on your own journey with things. And I'm always seeing those two kind of parallels. I've got business and then there's me as well. And the two are always aligned. They're not separate entities. You've got to bring them together. And you've got to want to bring them together. Loads there for sure. I'm really curious to your definition of resistance and fear as well, without taking it off too much of track, because I think I'm just still, the irony is, that's the point I was going to make, is that I'm doing this talk, but I'm like, I could almost go back round and do it a whole again, because I'm like, I've got, and that could put you off even doing a talk. This is the exact point. But if I'm not going to do the talk and say, I don't know everything about this is just my story within that. And actually it's opened up to a whole lot of other things. And like you say, it's not allowing that to hold me back. It's going, that's exciting. That's what I'm going to go into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really, really key point, that when we talk about any of these concepts, we are just bringing an area, we're just shining a light on an area of that topic. We can't cover the whole topic and there's one key reason for that. It's because each of us have our own meaning that gets attached to those words or those what that references in terms of our own experiences. So when you talk about resistance, it means something different to you than somebody else. And by talking about it, you're highlighting an experience to see, does this resonate for you? Is this the same as your experience? Or is your experience different and I'm just adding another angle to it that might help you reflect? Because it's all helpful. None of us can know exactly what that means to somebody else. That's their journey, that's their area to explore for themselves. What does it mean? So when you talk about, for you there's a difference between resistance and fear, that's because of the meaning layer.
Yeah.
They mean different things to you. So really this is a question for ourselves is, what does this mean for me? What does it refer to in terms of my own experiences? And what is it about that feels really difficult or feels okay? These are our explorations. These are the things that we want to understand about ourselves.
And I think just what you shared there is, then it's the way it makes me feel is that this is why it's so important that you work out exactly what you want to bring change to and who can create that safe space for you. And I think that there's lots of places out there. That's why I'm big on wanting to create a community in business, because I want it to be a safe space where people feel they're able to share things, they're able to be vulnerable, they're able to connect, because that's what truly allows people to be themselves in whatever area of their life they're coming to it with, or they're working on, etc.
Exactly. Gosh, that psychological safety is absolutely key. And I
Yeah.
think it's missing in so many different places, in lots of workplaces, in corporate, um, in people's own businesses. They feel like they can have more psychological safety, but then they're triggered by the business environment. So, it's really important that we have a sense of psychological safety so that we can be authentically ourselves. We can't belong to any community where we have to sacrifice or self-abandon ourselves. We have to feel like we're okay to show up authentically, because we can't provide whatever industry you're in, whatever service you're offering, whatever products, it has to come from our authentic self. It
Yeah.
doesn't work otherwise.
Yeah. Look, there's so much we could go into, isn't there, in so many different areas, as we were just saying. I'm really interested as well, because I know you spent time with Tony Robbins this year at his event, and you can pronounce his name better than me, which we said at the start, Gabor.
Gabor Mate.
Yes. So I'm
Yeah.
aware of his work and I've heard some of his podcasts. Who's been your biggest inspiration, and kind of where's that come from for you to be doing what you're doing now?
That's such a hard question to answer. Um, because everybody, each person that you kind of come across, personal development, therapy world, psychology world, all add sort of color to that picture.
I love
And
that.
there isn't one person that I would hang all of that on, and rightly so, because each has added something for me. What I do know is, in this journey of coming into the psychology world, doing an undergraduate psychology degree, it's all theory, it's all just understanding things. There's no kind of clinical application. And then going on to do the clinical doctorate, where we're taught different therapy models. What I've learned along the way is to shift from being in our head space to being in our heart space, because true change actually comes through emotional connection and being connected with the experiences that we've had and being connected with ourselves. So my inspiration has been more that than a person. So whether that's particular models or particular experiences that have added to that, for me, that's the key piece. Without that, we're still a bit disconnected. If we only think about thoughts, we're still going to be a bit disconnected from the true richness of what human experience is.
Yeah, that's really, it's interesting, and it's, well, I'm going to stop saying that word because somebody called me on it a while ago, but I'm gonna work on that. But it's where that means that my brain's going on those cogwheels or the spinning wheel of the washing machine. That's what's happening in my head. That part of being disconnected from things. And yeah, I think it's quite scary, some of it, isn't it? I think back to lots of what we've spoken about today, and then examples of my own story and journey as well, and think, yeah, there's lots there. And that's where I know that you've, so sometimes there's been parts where I've said to people like, I'm not there yet, I'm not ready to, as well.
Yeah. And that's okay. We're not on anyone else's timeline.
Mm.
We're doing this journey step by step in at the pace that feels right for us. For a lot of people, for most people, really, it's scary to drop from our headspace into our felt experience, because at some point in our early life, feeling things felt scary or
Yeah.
awful. And so we stay in our heads because we're trying to keep away from that pain. We don't realize that by turning towards that pain, which seems completely counterintuitive, we learn that by turning towards that pain, we're actually healing it. We're not just dwelling in it. We're not just like submerged under it. We need to turn towards it to truly heal it, because otherwise, if we stay in our head, what we've done is we've buried that painful experience, but it's still there. It's locked away in some sort of cabinet, and it's still inside of us. Exactly. If we open the lid of that cabinet, it's still the same as it was when we locked it in there. And it won't change, and it won't move on, and it won't shift, and it won't evolve unless we turn towards it.
Yeah. It's been lovely to speak with you today. It's really thought-provoking. That's a better word than interesting, isn't it? Or 2 words. I'll go with that. Where can people connect with you and find out more about what you do? Because I definitely know there's through my relationship with you, and people will see that, which is the fact of how we've kept our conversation going, our relationship since we met on the mastermind. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. People can connect with me through the usual places: Instagram, Facebook. I've also got a website that people can go and have a look and read a bit more about me. So yeah, I'm sure you can share the links for those. And I do offer people a call as well, because I recognize that it can be quite daunting for a lot of people to step from the coaching space into a therapy space. It can feel a bit daunting, it can feel a bit unknown, and there's lots of feelings that can get evoked. So to kind of offer people kind of a holding hand, I do offer initial calls just to talk through what therapy looks like, whether it's right for someone, what they're looking for, and that kind of thing. So you can find all the information about that on my website.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you like today's talk, go ahead and hit subscribe and make sure you commit to one thing when you walk away. I really think this is a gift we can all give ourselves. And if you'd like help in growing your business, hit the show notes and find the direct link to me on WhatsApp. Send me your question and I'll get straight back to you. Thank you for your time.